Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Arthur Waters, who has very kindly found some time to sit with us. We're at the Lambeth Mediation Service offices here in Streatham Hill, Brixton, and we're just going to have a few words about Arthur. I contacted you because you became a member of the Restorative Forum not that long ago.
Yeah, that's right.
And you're a volunteer.
Yes, yeah, that's right.
Okay. Now, first thing, could you tell us a bit about yourself, and after that, how you came to become a volunteer in mediation first, and now restorative justice?
Okay. So I first came across the idea of I think I definitely came to restorative justice from mediation. Mediation is what's led me to restorative justice, and I joined the Restorative Forum when I was on placement at Sussex Youth Offending Service as part of my master's degree.
Okay.
That I've just finished doing now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks. So I've just finished doing that, and I was in community and youth work at Goldsmiths.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of that was doing placements, and one of the placements was at the Restorative Justice team at the Sussex Youth Offending Service. And so one of the workers there said that if I was interested, it would be an interesting thing to sign up to. So but I think the kind of going back in terms of me, I think I've done mediation for quite a few years now, and community mediation is my background more than anything else. And so then then naturally led to restorative justice, just as something that I thought looked really interesting as another sort of.
You know, I look at you and you're very young.
Okay.
And I'm thinking, what could motivate a young person with so many alternative things to do, like going out getting drunk? I'm sure you probably did that as well. You're going to cinema and other things to fill your time with. What motivated you to become a mediator, a volunteer mediator?
Yeah, I don't know. So this was the thing that made me interested in mediation. Was I've always been interested in the idea of kind of supporting people in some capacity. That's a very vague overall, but
it's a good reason though. To go to this.
But the idea, I think, when I was in my first year at university, I went to Sussex University and I did international relations, and I spoke to a family friend who was already in that industry, and she was working in peace building organisations internationally, where they would kind of work to build projects in other areas that require kind of help or support in, I don't know, kind of resolving conflicts and that sort of thing. It would always be about making sure that it was a situation where the individuals in that community had requested the help, rather than kind of going in there and saying, we're going to help you.
So you're not the UN, you just
no,
go there
exactly. And so it's more of a kind of a...
See first if they would like to have an intervention.
Yeah, exactly. But I really liked the idea of what she was talking about, and I thought, that sounds really interesting. What things would be interesting that I can do to try and start equipping myself to get into a career in that way? And she kind of offhand mentioned mediation as a thing that was interesting. And I kind of looked into it. And this was in Brighton, and there was Brighton and Hove Independent Mediation Service. And so I did my first kind of facilitative community mediation training there. Did the kind of the long 10-week course. And that was just really, really good. I think that 10-week course had a big effect on me. I thought it was I really liked the idea of just being really considerate and really thinking about your impact and the way that you say things and the impact that can have on other people. Because the whole idea about mediation is that you can, and if one of the parties can understand the impact they're having on one of the other parties, then it gives them a much better chance of kind of finding a common ground to resolve it. And so I liked the idea that mediation was something that could try and instill that kind of empathy in people.
So, I mean, you're talking about mediation as a discipline, let's say, or a technique. What do you see as the role of the mediator? Why do you think that two people who have a conflict need a mediator there, or a restorative justice facilitator, or whatever you want to call it?
I think it's really useful to have someone there to be able to guide a conversation, because that inevitably, if you're speaking to someone that you're in a dispute with as a neighbour, or that you've kind of been involved in kind of a crime previously, then that's something you need to be able to help manage, I suppose. But I think a big part of what works is obviously the mediators need to convince the parties, or the restorative justice practitioners need to convince the parties to meet and kind of have a joint discussion where appropriate. But if you can have that happen, I think having this neutral space is a really big part of it. And I think I don't want to kind of say that you don't need the mediators, you just need the safe space. But I think the safe space is really important. Having that place where you're not kind of only talking to them when you're shouting at them when they've just come home and you're seeing them through your window, or you've only ever spoken to them when that incident happened in the crime, when the crime took place, or when you kind of confronted them about it on the street afterwards and you were feeling really angry. Like having a place where you can come in from a calm kind of standpoint, I think makes a really big difference. I think kind of that's part of the reason why mediation is so important, because it enables you to have this conversation that you would never normally have.
So in a way, as well, there's a lot of prior work that goes in before two people accept to sit in front of each other in a room, and I think that that work is really important, because the one that eventually leads, in many cases, to a conference or a meeting. Whereas if you don't have that, it is very unlikely that you'll have the two parties
definitely, that's true,
talking about meeting and having a word about a quiet word about what happened. So a lot of that work. I mean, many people don't appreciate it, but I have had facilitators tell me, that they have been trying to arrange things. Obviously, you cannot push people, but they've been dealing with a situation for about 6 months, trying to come to a conclusion that may very well be a conference. And it takes that amount of time very often. And, whereas I think that there has been now new regulation that indicates that they might want to try to compress that time so that it's not indefinite. Because at the moment, you're not limited, you're not bound in terms of time for how long it can take. But I think that there are some moves that want to indicate that they want to limit that in some formal way. The other thing, I suppose, and this is about your training. You trained with whom?
That was with Common Ground. I trained with Common Ground.
And that was here in London? Or in Brighton?
In London, yeah. So when I moved to London after finishing university, I kind of asked Brighton and Hove Independent Mediation Service, which organisation should I go for? But I'm moving to London, and they said Common Ground's a good one that's similar to ours.
Were they any good for you?
And yeah, really good. They're really good. And I kind of moved to here and naturally kind of went to Lambeth Mediation Service. But yeah, when I was with Common Ground, it was really good.
And in your training, what do you find that was key to being able to help others resolve conflict? I mean, because I suppose that a lot of volunteers think, you need to have natural empathy, which I think is to an extent a requirement, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you need to want to help people as well, which is another requirement when you become volunteer. You don't do it for the money.
Yeah, definitely.
But then they equip you with the techniques.
Yeah, definitely. The training was really good. It kind of gave me the knowledge I needed to be able to do it. I do think empathy is really important. I think empathy is like a really important skill and a really important thing to try and be able to have the parties feel. And so I suppose if you're not an empathic person, you might struggle to say what's needed to get the other people to feel empathic. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I do think to an extent you need to have the right attitude coming into mediation, and you need to have a desire to resolve the conflict in a way that's, I don't know, the way the training says, like not one that you're trying to make happen, but one that's kind of coming from the parties and that sort of thing.
It's agreed by them, and
yeah. So it's not you trying to step in, kind of say
you have to sign a contract where it says you need to pay this money or do whatever thing for this other person to their garden for a few months. That's interesting. Coming back to why you got into this, if you were to talk to other young people about volunteering in this sort of field, in restorative justice and mediation, what would you say that you gain from doing it? Why would you encourage others to do it? Assuming that you encourage others to do it.
Yeah, stay away. No, I think, I would definitely encourage people to do it. I think there's quite a few things to be gained. I think in terms of kind of giving you skills for future roles, obviously, I just think kind of it teaches you about conflict management and the ability and how to kind of go about making sure that when you're working with someone, even if you're not the mediator and you're not mediating the parties, if it's your conflict, there are ways like this gives you really useful skills to understand why someone else might be coming from the point that they're coming from, and therefore why it might be that you're up against each other and you need to try and...
So what you're saying is that whereas previously you might have just gone into a row with someone that came into the office with the wrong attitude. Now you might want to say, let's take a look and see why this person is coming this way, and then let's try to be understanding.
Definitely, and I think that I think even kind of outside of work and in your private life, I definitely think for me, kind of just in terms of my friendships and relationships and stuff, I think it just kind of it brings an attitude that just helps you to think about where the other person's coming from, not just yourself. And because of that, it makes it much easier for you to be like, okay, well, if they said that, well, if they meant that by saying that, then obviously me having this attitude isn't working with the attitude that they're having it. And so actually what needs to happen is a conversation needs to be had where people are able to actually understand where the different positions are. Because I think it's about kind of opening communication, opening kind of dialogue is something that mediation is
instead of going for the F word, you just go and say, "Are you okay?"
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Or just thinking about it like instead of being like, if they say something attacking to you and you want to resolve by saying attacking back to them, instead of being like, why did they say that? And then it means that you're able to kind of actually understand rather than just kind of carrying on with the conflict. I would say, yeah.
And what about being with people and seeing that you can actually make a difference to their lives? One of the things that I get told most often with people working in terms of the communities and neighborhoods is like, you have the typical two neighbors that live wall to wall, door to door, actually, and one day things change, and they're not very sure why, and this carries on for like years and years, and they live in the same place, and they stop talking to each other, and sometimes they're just not equipped with the skills to say, let's have a conversation, and they don't have the communication skills to go into that and to modulate themselves as well in that sense.
Right. So it's interesting. I think I think that because I think people in that situation of conflict can kind of firstly not want to necessarily recognise that there's a problem that's big enough that needs to be dealt with in this kind of way. Because I think mediation can come across just in general as, because it is quite an official process, people can think, I don't need this to kind of happen. This is quite an official process. I can deal with this myself, and that's fair enough. If you can, you can. But I think that, I don't know. Yeah, I think that if you're having, I've totally lost my train of thought. Let me just think for a second. About whether people are equipped with kind of the communication skills themselves. I don't know. Yeah, I think that it's definitely useful to have someone who is a third party. I think that's probably the most important thing. Someone who's so removed from it that they can kind of give an objective opinion. And then, especially, I think the fact that you're volunteering as a community mediator goes quite a long way, because the people have already kind of typically, at least in mediation, I think in restorative justice to some extent too, but like specifically for mediation, like people have already got in touch with the council or with the police or with the environmental kind of, all of those sorts of kind of organisations and bodies. Mm-hmm. They're already getting involved in various ways, and they're already on different people's sides, and it's already feeling a little bit like they're getting support from that side or they're not from that side. And having these volunteers who have no agenda whatsoever except to try and make the situation better for everyone is quite a good thing. I think that's quite a strong standpoint to come from, and it means that people will be more likely to take in what you're saying because they know that you're not there for any other reason than trying to make the situation more easy for people.
That's something I have heard as well before from volunteers, that people, if you're official, if you're working doing this, if this is your job, then people wonder whether you have an ulterior motive.
Yeah, exactly.
You have objectives, let's say. You have to hit targets in terms of resolving conflict, or you have to stop them calling the police, for example, for stupid things like that.
Yeah.
But in this case, that's not the case. You're doing this out of the kindness of your heart, and you just want to listen to them and see if you can help. So that's a different approach.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Sorry, you can say.
No. I was actually going to go into another question. We're here in Lambeth, Brixton, Lambeth, which is very very multicultural.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about sort of a rough profile of your typical users?
Really varied. Yeah, I think, I don't know if I can really. I just think, I mean, neighbours. I mean, because in mediation,
you get all sorts.
Yeah, I mean, kind of different ages, different ethnicities. Yeah, there's no real kind of this particular ethnicity is always the ones that are involved. Like, no, I can't. Not that I can.
I'm going to respond to you the question why I'm asking this. It's because some people have also mentioned, that restorative justice in particular seems like an occupation for white middle-aged men and women who have nothing better to do. I think nothing further from the truth, to be honest, especially if you're doing it as a volunteer. But there's this niggling that there aren't that many people from diverse backgrounds involved. And I thought that being in Lambeth, in London in general, or any big cities where you have a lot of diversity people from different backgrounds,
yeah.
I was wondering whether that would be an issue. If we have people from a different cultural background, coming and seeing you as a white boy, well educated and things like that. I mean, do you think that could be a barrier? Could they relate to you? Could they think that you would understand them? Things like that.
I definitely had a bit of a complex for a while, worrying that kind of if I was to come across kind of different ethnicities, I wouldn't be able to kind of relate because I have a different background and like it's true, like different cultural backgrounds and that sort of stuff. There will always be people from different places which you will find harder to necessarily connect with. But I think but actually the truth is that that's really not the case. But it's really important to be aware of your own situation and your own kind of background and aware of the impact that it could potentially have on other people. And then to kind of like work with that, I suppose. And so being aware that I'm kind of like a white middle class educated man, that
you probably believe in mediation or restorative justice more than they do as well.
Do I believe in it, did you say?
Yeah. Because you know about it, you haven't studied it.
Yeah, because I've done the research and I feel like having done it quite a few, kind of volunteering for a few years, it's definitely something I feel like I know about, probably more than most because I've just done the more research than most. But I think it's about making sure that if I have this kind of ethnicity and have this background, it needs to be one that I'm aware of the impact it can have on people potentially, and therefore. So
in a way, you need to modulate yourself to become transparent as a mediator. You need to be there to make sure that things are okay, but you don't want to interfere with your. I mean, I don't want to call it prejudices, but with your own baggage.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Like being impartial and being neutral is like just so important within mediation. It's about making sure that you are purely here with the objective idea about trying to make the situation better, rather than bringing any of your own kind of agenda in. Definitely. So I think naturally that can happen. That's something that you need to make sure it doesn't get in the way. Kind of needs to be something that stays out of it. But then at the same time, there have been people that I've had as co-mediators who have had kind of the same kind of cultural background as someone that you've been mediating with, and it's meant that in the initial meetings it's been easier to have that kind of rapport and make it so that the party is able to open up a little bit more, which is useful in that way. But then also you've got to be careful, because then in the joint meeting you need to make sure that rapport hasn't overstepped the boundary so that they feel like you should be on their side. So which kind of underpins again how you should probably make sure that that's something that you're aware of in terms of your own situation, but also one that you don't bring into mediation.
Okay, I'm going to ask you an easy question, I think. Can you tell us about perhaps an anecdote, a case, obviously without naming names, where you thought that it went really well? You had two parties in conflict, and then it went really well. It motivated you to say, I'm going to carry on doing this.
Does it need to be restorative justice or mediation, or which do you prefer? Because I think one that was kind of a bit more of a extreme case was a mediation that I did with Find Common Ground, and it was between two parties who we'd done the initial meetings and it had gone well, and kind of it was, as a lot of things are, about kind of noise and people living on top of each other and that sort of thing. And it went to the joint meeting and started off immediately, kind of you could tell that like there was definitely beef between them and it wasn't going to go away straight away, and things just kind of got more and more heated. And I think
during the meeting,
during the meeting, I think kind of in hindsight, I think the room was set up not how it could have been, and I think kind of there were things that were wrong with it. This was kind of in the earlier days, and I feel like definitely there were things to reflect on from that. But I think that it was really good in terms of the outcome, at least, even though it was quite kind of a intense place to get there, because it was building up, and then kind of got into a little bit of a screaming match between the two women, and it had to be kind of like called and kind of time out and that sort of thing. And one of them stormed out with the intention to leave. And so it was that point that my co-mediator stayed with the person who was in the room, and I went and followed the person outside and kind of had a 5-minute conversation to try and kind of calm them down. The massive vent had kind of been done, and then kind of managed to convince them that actually this was still a good opportunity to try and have some good done if it felt like both parties were wanting to carry on, and both parties did want to carry on, and then it was. Actually, we should just quickly pause.
Yeah, that's fine.
Sorry about that.
Let's stop this for a second. And we're back in the room. Arthur had to answer the doorbell.
That's all good. It's all good. So it had gone into a bit of a screaming match. They'd had kind of 5 minutes to kind of calm down and came back into the room, and it was just crazy, the transformation, kind of like from the like proper like really yelling at each other and not making any progress or saying anything useful, just being really angry, to suddenly being in this much more kind of constructive place where they could both actually start to try to resolve the situation. And it felt like the venting was kind of a needed part of that process. They needed to have that kind of just being angry and getting those emotions out of the way, so that they were then in a place where actually they didn't want to carry on with that sort of situation and wanted to try and make things better. And this was the perfect space to try and make that happen, where we could kind of like help support them in having that conversation. But it just felt like, it was such a crazy transformation from that. And then kind of at the end of the process, they'd come to a very useful agreement. They'd managed to put in place kind of ways to communicate going forwards and that sort of thing. And they kind of left together, and they were going to go and kind of head back to their homes at the same time in the same way. And
but they didn't hug.
They kind of, maybe they even did hug. I can't remember what I can't remember. But it felt like kind of just the difference in attitude from beginning to end was just so like striking. It was really quite interesting to see that change, and how mediation can allow a space for that to happen.
How do you feel about it?
I felt like it was really good to see that change. I felt like there were definitely things that could have been done differently by me and my co-mediator, because I felt like it's obviously unpleasant for a person to go through that kind of screaming match, and ideally you don't want that to happen and things like that. But and so it was a useful learning experience for me to kind of know what to take on, to try and amend, to try and improve. But it was also really nice to see the progress that could be made through mediation for individuals. And so definitely, that was one of the things that kind of inspired me to kind of try and get better and be able to carry on doing it. Yeah.
That's very good. I'm going to ask you a difficult question now. You kind of have answered this question with what you just said, but have you had any bad experiences whilst doing mediation or restorative justice, and have you been able to identify learning points from it? Have you been able to say, this is what went wrong, and this is what needs to be done next time?
Yeah. So that's definitely an example of one that I learned a lot from and then got inspired by, but also one where things didn't go as well as they could have done. And I think so it's definitely something I took away from that was like the seating arrangements could have been way better, because it was quite a cramped room, and there was just kind of like, you get those like square tables, like small square tables. It was just two small square tables next to each other, and then one of the parties sitting here, one party sitting here, then me sitting here, and the other mediator sitting there. So they were just like in this confined space, and we were almost kind of hemming them in, so they're having a face-off, and it just felt like it does make a difference if they're just there like at each other. There's no opportunity for them to kind of sit and talk to the mediator instead, or have a way of doing it that would be not so confrontational.
So they might have felt cornered into a place where they didn't want to be.
Yeah, and felt like they kind of, there was only one way to direct the anger that they were feeling, and rather than like people will quite often kind of talk to the mediator, even though the other person's just there, and say how I was really annoyed about this, because it's easier to say it to the mediator than to say it to that person's face, and it can take a little bit out of the blow, and then you can try and then work with that comment to make it better when you're putting it forwards. But if that's not an option and all you can do is talk to that person, then it makes it a little bit more confrontational, I think. Is there other stuff? I mean, there's definitely been other cases where I feel like, I mean, I know there was a case in Brighton when there was a couple and a woman, and the couple, and basically kind of in the initial meetings, it wasn't quite picked up on. This was one of my first, maybe even my very first joint mediation. But like, we didn't pick up on it that much during the process until the joint meeting. But it became quite evident in the joint meeting that the boyfriend of the girl who was living in the house, it was this couple that had a problem with the woman who was living above. It became quite obvious that the boyfriend was the real problem in terms of the reason that the relationship had broken down, and he became quite kind of aggressive and had to leave and that sort of thing. And it just kind of so that was interesting to be making sure that, because then at the point where he found himself that he was actually too angry and have to leave, and then went to go and have a smoke outside, and it was during that time when the girlfriend and the woman had a conversation, and it was a much more honest conversation, and it was much more constructive, and then eventually had to leave anyway. But it was really useful that they had a chance, and they kind of managed to leave together and had a much more useful process when they weren't there. So it's important to know who is involved and in what way, kind of.
So you would say that you can never underestimate how important it is to prepare these meetings. Yeah, the groundwork is always so important. I know that in mediation it's typically just one meeting, and that can sometimes be enough, definitely. But I know that in restorative justice you need a lot more to kind of get people on board and understanding exactly what's going to be involved and that sort of thing. And I do think that that's something where it isn't just about the space or anything like that. You do need to have the mediator or the restorative justice person there to make sure the groundwork is good enough so that the meeting has a chance to succeed. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna just ask you the last question, and it's a typical one. I mean, what do you expect to happen in the next few months, years? What do you want to happen? What do you want it to happen with what you're doing here in terms of volunteering in mediation or restorative justice? So for me personally, or for you, your expectations. Okay. I don't know. I mean, I'm just kind of carrying on, I suppose. I really like mediation. I think it's such a useful thing. I think it's such a useful thing to have as an option for people to use in the community. I think that I really like restorative justice, and I've done a lot more mediation than I have of restorative justice, but I really think that restorative justice has a lot of potential. I have this kind of idea about kind of empathy and what restorative justice can bring, and I think this idea of when you have a young person, like someone said to me that they felt that empathy is something that you can only give to other people if you've received it lots of times yourself as well. And that makes sense to me. I think I like the idea that, like, how can you be expected to understand someone else's point of view if you haven't had people try and understand yours before? And I think restorative justice, in cases that I've done at least, there's definitely been a common occurrence that the victim, after kind of being upset and kind of letting the offender know they've been upset, gives the victim an opportunity to understand the offender's viewpoint and then potentially empathise with the offender and kind of support them, or kind of offer some, especially with, this is more specifically with young offenders, kind of want to try and see whether they can try and help them in their situation rather than, and kind of there's issues with that, but it's interesting that you get the empathy from the victim towards the young offender. And when the young offender can experience that empathy, then it gives them a chance to see what it feels like and then to give that empathy back to the victim in a way that's useful for the victim too. But it also gives a chance for the victim, for the young offender, to really reflect on the impact that they had towards the victim, because that they can empathise with the victim, having been empathised themselves. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. It's very interesting that you have gone into young offending, because it is one of the hotspots for restorative justice. Yeah. And in fact, we have had this discussion with other people before, where, essentially, at the moment here, in many cultures, we dehumanize young people, and we presume them offenders in waiting, or potential offenders, potential criminals. And to some extent, that drives how we treat young people in society these days. And and then there's the backlash from young people thinking like, if you don't have faith in me and if you don't have trust in me, then I'm going to behave in this way. I'm not going to give you anything, so to speak. So the social contract, if you can call it that, breaks down at that point. Whereas with restorative justice, when you have young offenders, if you have indeed that sort of outcome where the victim feels that compelled to offer, to humanize that young person again, and to offer sympathy, understanding, perhaps, not necessarily forgiveness at that point, but say, I understand where you come from, you still did something very wrong to me, but I see why you end up doing that, or you end up in that sort of place.
And it can give the offender a chance to empathise with the victim, and then it gives them a chance to think, maybe that's not something I want to do again. And I think that's kind of, for me, that's where the strength of restorative justice lies, is building that empathy so that there's the lack of chance of reoffending. And I think, it's true. I mean, you kind of get the media portraying young people in a certain way, and I think kind of there's a lot to do. It's inevitable that if that's how you see your current generation being portrayed, then there's a way that you feel like maybe that's how I should behave. And I think that's not. I think kind of some people can say that that's definitely the whole reason, and some people say there's nothing to do with it. But I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle, that it does have an impact to some extent, and it is something that people need to be aware of. Yeah, I'd say so.
Well, that's very good. Very kind of you having me here. And, we have been doing it for about half an hour, I think, which is fair enough. So, Arthur, thank you very much for having me here and receiving me.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Miguel. Thank you.